Many of you are aware of the fact that I work with GCM, that's Global Catalytic Ministries. That's a ministry that's working primarily in Iran, but throughout the Middle East, in the underground church. Now, GCM has recently launched an extension of GCM called Sheep Among Wolves. And they're actually training and preparing the Western church to learn the principles, to implement the models of discipleship that they've been using under the heavy hand of the Iranian regime for well over the past decade and a half. And they're training Western leaders in terms of how to implement these methods, to teach them the hard-learned lessons that they've learned over the years, because ultimately persecution is coming to the West. Now, GCM is not only working in Iran, because Iran presently is still the fastest growing church in the world. Despite the persecution, I mean, we complain here when an American or Canadian pastor, for example, or an Australian pastor is arrested for having church services in the age of COVID and this type of thing. The believers in Iran have to secretly meet. They can't even have paraphernalia. Just last week, there were a handful of Iranian Christians that were arrested for having Christian paraphernalia, things like Bibles or jewelry or simple things like that, put in jail. Okay, so we think we have it hard, and we're just barely beginning to see it. They genuinely live under real persecution, and yet they are growing at a growth rate of about 20% per year. Okay, multiplying about 20% per year, the fastest growing church in the world. What is the second fastest growing church? It's Afghanistan. Believe it or not, Afghanistan is the second fastest growing church in the world, and it really is exploding. I get to hear the personal testimonies. I get to hear the testimonies directly from the individuals that are doing this, that are planting churches, planting house churches, establishing discipleship-making movements. And it's amazing, absolutely amazing. So here you have, okay, let's just put these two realities side by side. You have the fastest growing church movement in the world in Iran, and then right next door, the second in Afghanistan. Okay, the second fastest growing in the world in Afghanistan. And one of the most radical Islamic groups is taking over the nation. Now, just this past week, we were able to hear from one of the workers that works for or under GCM, Global Catalytic Ministries. And this individual shared an update. We said, what's going on? I mean, we're seeing pictures. We got a picture from another worker just recently, as I described, of this truck driver who's going into the villages and shuttling Christians out into the plains, out into the mountains. Not just Christians, but many of them Christians. And the testimony that they sent was, they said, we don't fear the Taliban. We are looking for gospel opportunities. We see this as an opportunity. Same thing in talking with this worker. This individual said, look, people are incredibly insecure. People are afraid. They're worried about their family. Men are just obsessing, saying, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Like, with my job, how can I pay for my family? Should I flee? Should I not flee? What should I do? Every man, every father can relate to this with young children, with what, like, this storm cloud is sweeping across the nation rapidly. What should I do? And this individual said there's tremendous insecurity. But then they went on to say, but in the midst of all of this insecurity, it provides us with an amazing gospel opportunity. And they went on to describe all of the amazing things that have been happening even over just the past few weeks. Individuals that were previously completely hardened, not interested in studying the Bible, not interested in being prayed for, not interested in talking about the things of God, suddenly asking questions, suddenly wide open. In fact, one of the individuals that was interesting, the wife had become a believer. Okay, so our worker there in Afghanistan had been discipling the wife. The husband, however, had no interest. He wouldn't come to the Bible studies. He wouldn't talk about any of these things. Well, completely on his own, of course, his wife is praying for him. Completely on his own, he found a Dari, is his language. He found a Dari Bible online, and he started studying the Bible. And then he came to his wife and the worker that's working for GCM and said, why didn't you tell me about these things before? I've been studying the Bible. I've been reading about Jesus, and he's falling in love with Jesus. He's fascinated with Jesus. He hasn't become a believer yet. But he's saying, why didn't you tell? And they said, we've been trying to get you to come. And he goes, no, you were trying, So the point is, suddenly there's this moment of profound interest. In human insecurity, hearts are wide open. And we're hearing the same testimony across the boards. So this is the thing, and this is the principle. And I want, if there's one thing that you come away from this brief session from, earthly insecurity, dark circumstances, difficult circumstances, painful circumstances, almost always, not always, almost always are an amazing gospel opportunity. It's a very simple principle. God, again, I don't want to say always, but he almost always, in order to open people's hearts up to hear him, he breaks us. I can say this in my own life, in my own personal testimony. Life was not just going fantastic for me. Everything was wonderful. I was successful in all I did. Everything was clicking. And then one day I just said, I need Jesus. I'm going to repent of my sins. No, the Lord brought a series of circumstances into my life, and he broke me. And then ultimately I reached out and I cried out to the Lord, and he opened my eyes and he heard me. Okay, there's this wonderful verse in Job. It says, when a man is in a heap, like when he's on the floor, when he's in ruin, when he's broken, it says he stretches out his hand to God. And again, these principles aren't always universal, but they're so common throughout biblical history. I mean, this is how the Lord is ultimately going to save all of Israel. In the last days, in Deuteronomy 32, he says, when she has come to the end of her strength, then I will begin speaking to her. And that's what will happen with Jacob's trouble. It's true with most of us. The Lord breaks us, and then he heals us. Though he is the one, he actually says this, I am the one that brings death. I am the one that brings life. I am the one that wounds. I am the one that heals. And so in the midst of this moment of darkness, in the midst of this circumstantial nightmare that's unfolding in Afghanistan, it is a moment of profound gospel opportunity, guys. This is like one of the best opportunities of the past 10 years, other than ISIS. And so there's another principle here that I just want to piggyback on. So when we look at, we say, what is the reason? What is the reason for the success of the explosive growth in Iran? Well, quite simply, back in 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini, he established the Iranian Revolution, the Iranian Islamic Revolution. And Islamic law, Islamic Sharia law, specifically Shia Islamic law, was established as the rule of law for the nation. It became a theocracy, so to speak, an Islamic theocracy under the Ayatollahs, who are essentially the stewards or the mediators between God and the people, and their invisible Messiah figure known as the Mahdi, or the 12th Imam that he's often referred to in Iran. And so the people found themselves under the crushing, suffocating force of Islam. And that suffocating reality is, it crushes the human soul. It crushed the Iranians. They hated it. I mean, yes, there are some people that embrace it, but for the most part, the people rejected it. They bucked. They didn't like being forced to wear the head covering and the hijab, or have the religious police. These women, they would walk up, if a woman wore lipstick or something like this that was a violation of Sharia law, they would walk up with napkins and say, we're going to wipe this off. But they would actually put razor blades, and they would walk up and, slit their lips open, like that type of cruel religious government, that type of thing. The people hated it. And it was not long before the government and Islam was viewed as the enemy of the people. And so many of the Persians, so many of the Iranians, such an ancient, noble, spirited people, they bucked, they rejected it. And within just a few decades, in the midst of this oppressive atmosphere, they began crying out. They began crying out because they were broken, they were needy, they were hungry. And so interestingly, that suffocating dark shadow, that presence of Islam, has reverb. Okay, the Lord knew this beforehand. When Ayatollah Khomeini started the Islamic Revolution, the Lord said this is going to be a great opportunity. And so now we have a people that are broken, we have a people that are hungry, and we have people that are turning to and crying out to God, and He's responding and He's revealing Himself to them. Often in visions and dreams, the man of white, such a common story throughout the Middle East, right? So we have the fastest growing church in Iran. Well, likewise, now we have the same thing happening in Afghanistan. We've had the same thing, and I predicted it with ISIS. Satan always overplays his cards with ISIS. You know, Satan thought, oh, I'm going to establish my caliphate right there in the heart of the Middle East, in Syria and Iraq, right where it says in the Bible, Isaiah 19, that there's going to be a mighty people that will serve me in the last days, and they will be my people, and this type of thing. And Satan goes, oh yeah, well, I'm going to establish my caliphate. And they start producing these horrific videos of beheadings and executions and all sorts of horrific things, trying to terrorize and scare the world. But what happens is reverb. The human spirit, despite all of us being reprobate apart from Him, still has that spark of God because we're created in the image of God. And they recognize, they say, this is not God. What ISIS is doing is not God. That's what Satan is up to. And they actually turn away from Islam. They reject it. And they go, yes, many of these ISIS fighters are opportunists and this type of thing, but they're also quoting the Hadith. They're quoting the Quran. Many of them know Islamic law. They know the Quran better than many of the average Muslims. And they go, that actually is Islam. And we don't want anything to do with it. And so in the same way, there's a revival right now breaking out in northern Syria and some of the Kurdish areas. In the city of Kobani, there's churches being planted that are made up entirely of former Muslims who have converted to evangelicalism, converted to evangelical Christianity. Okay, so we're seeing this in northern Syria. We've seen it now for a couple decades in Iran, and we're at a moment where it's exploding. It's now reaching critical mass in Afghanistan. So it's an amazing thing. So how can we pray? What can we do? How can we partner? Well, very simply, the first thing that we can always do is, having discussed it, having discerned it, having looked at really what's unfolding, we can give ourselves to this thing in prayer. Say, God, I want to partner with you. I'm going to join you. I'm going to start praying for Afghanistan. Second, we can actually partner with those that are on the ground doing the stuff. And so I want to put out the website for GCM. The new address is sheepamongwolves.world. That's one of the addresses that'll get you there. We're actually in the process of developing the website, and we've just sort of released a new website. So this message will be passé in just a few months. But go to sheepamongwolves.world. And if you'd actually like to partner financially, and yes, there is a tremendous financial need. Okay, right now with all of these families that are being relocated, there's a, look, and they live simple for what it's worth. They're not like Americans that, are moving their houses and their basements filled with stuff out into, they're just taking tents and their families, the basic necessities, a few goats and this type of thing, and trying to get away from the Taliban. But this is an amazing opportunity, one, to save and partner with our Christian brothers and sisters as they're fleeing, but also to provide resources for those that are staying in the cities, in the villages that are ministering. And with very little right now, because there's bombings, there's attacks, schools are being blown up and this type of thing, there's a tremendous financial need. So yes, we can partner with them financially. We can partner with them in prayer. And if you want to take sort of the next step, you can actually join us as an organization, Sheep Among Wolves. We actually have a prayer meeting every week. We have a few prayer meetings every week. And we're praying for the spread of the movement, not just in the Middle East, but here in the West as well. And we're praying and we're crying out for discipleship-making movements to spread and thrive. So if you go to sheepamongwolves.world, you can enter in your email, you can click the different sort of things that you're interested in, and we'll reach out to you. And you can actually join a Zoom call with us and actually pray weekly, or you can start your own prayer meetings wherever you are, and you can be praying for this part of the world. And further, if you want to go so far as to actually be trained, you actually want to learn the techniques and the model, the method that the Iranian leaders have been using, as I said, for the past few decades. It's a significant commitment, and there's a vetting process, but you can sign up for that as well. And if you're really serious, we'd love to see you go all the way. So I'm going to leave that right there. It's just, guys, there's a moment of tremendous earthly sadness with what we see in Afghanistan. I don't want to undermine that or downplay that. But in the midst of this dark cloud, there is a moment of tremendous gospel opportunity. The Lord's not afraid. The Lord's not shaken by what's unfolding. He knew this was coming. He's actually behind it. And He is the one that wounds, but He's also the one that heals. He is the one, yes, that brings death, but He's also the one that brings life. And in the same way that He did for you and for me, He wounded us, but He healed us. And the end result is tremendous fruit. So there's good stuff unfolding. So I'm going to leave it right there. Look forward to seeing you all next time. Until then, guys, God bless. Have a fantastic week. And Maranatha.